Want to keep up with the latest LEGO Maker 96.1 videos? Make sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Hello everyone, LEGO Maker 96.1 here with another video. And welcome back to another On This Day in History. On this day in history, 159 years ago, Joseph E. Johnston surrendered his army to William T. Sherman, and John Wilkes Booth dies on this day. But first, let's go over John Wilkes Booth's death. Now, after shooting Lincoln, which left him mortally wounded, there was a manhunt to go after Lincoln and his killers. Not just his killers alone, but Joseph E. Johnston, Andrew Johnston's killer, and Secretary of State William H. Seward's killer. Now, as I stated earlier when I went over the sinking of the Titanic's anniversary and Lincoln's assassination's anniversary, there was a plot to kidnap Lincoln, and that plot was concocted by Booth and his co-conspirators. Now, the reason why they wanted to kidnap Lincoln, they want to hold him hostage in exchange for Confederate prisoners of war. But unfortunately, that plan changed when the war ended and Lincoln proposed his suffrage to African Americans and the right to vote. All part of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Civil War amendments. So after that, Booth changed his plan to kidnap Lincoln to outright kill him. And not just him alone, but Andrew Johnston and Seward, President, Vice President, and Secretary of State. If they did that, it would throw the North into total chaos, even continuing the war. Now, mind you, even though Lee surrendered to Grant in 1865 on the 9th of April, the war was still going on. There were still Confederates out in the field, and many of which didn't know that Lee surrendered to Grant. I imagine some did, but many of which want to continue fighting. And some just rather fled than live in a Union nation, or rather than accept surrender. Now, on the night of April 14th at 10:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Booth and his co-conspirators launched their attack. With Lincoln at Ford's Theater, Booth crept up to the presidential box at Ford's Theater, aimed his pistol on the back of Lincoln's head, and fired. Now, jumping from the president's box after he slashed Rathbone in the arm, Booth proclaimed "Sic Semper Tyrannis" while holding his dagger in the air. Now, many claim he said it earlier before jumping onto the stage and after shooting Lincoln, but to each his own. Now, many claimed he said, "The South is avenged," or "I have done it." Eyewitness accounts may differ of what happened that night. And not only Lincoln was shot, but Andrew Johnston's life was spared by George E. Atzerodt, and William H. Seward survived being knifed by Lewis Powell or Payne, whatever you want to call him. Now, as for Lewis Payne, he ran out of the house yelling, "I'm mad! I'm mad!" and after stabbing Seward and everyone inside. But miraculously, they survived. And George Atzerodt got drunk rather than kill Andrew Johnston. Now, as to what happened to Booth's leg, whether it was jumping from the presidential box or getting on his horse, or riding on his horse, Booth broke his leg and he managed to escape Washington. Now, as for Booth, he met up with a co-conspirator named David Harold, who was with Lewis Powell, and he flees the scene without leaving for Payne or Powell, whatever you want to call the guy. Now, Booth escaped, as I said earlier, and Harold soon caught up with him. And together, these guys went on the run. Did whatever they can to avoid being caught by federal troops. Now, Booth and Harold stopped at a place of Samuel Mudd, who was a doctor, and they tended Booth's leg. He tended Booth's leg. And after arrest, Booth and Harold left Mudd and they continued running from federal troops. And that led Booth to the farm of Garrett. The Garretts chose to take them in, but after discovering who they were, they stuck them in the barn. Now, in the early morning hours of the 26th, Booth's location was betrayed by a Confederate private named William Jett. And I did look this guy up, and this is 100% true. He looks just like Zach Bagans from Ghost Adventures, which I have made a picture of it, in which you can find on my DeviantArt and my Twitter page, or X now because Elon Musk. Federal troops surrounded the barn and they demand Booth to come out and surrender. Harold opted to surrender, but Booth wanted to fight. And he proclaimed to the federal troops that they had to prepare a stretcher for him. So federal troops lit the barn on fire, but Harold just surrendered. He just went out on hands in the air, and federal troops got him. But Booth chose to stay and fight rather than surrender to federal cavalry. Now, among the federal cavalrymen that was there on that farm was Corbett, Sergeant Boston Corbett. Now, he saw an opening at the barn while it's burning. And he claimed he saw Booth leveling his Spencer rifle, which he had, and while he was on the run, and he actually aimed it at the back. He actually aims his pistol in the opening and takes a shot, hoping he would do the same thing he did hoping that Corbett would do the same thing Booth did to Lincoln on the night of 14th. But unfortunately, it missed, and the ball hit Booth's neck, right on the vertebrae, paralyzing him from the neck down. Now, federal troops did get into the burning barn in time, and they pulled the wounded Booth out. And they took him to the porch, hoping they would tend to him. Now, as Booth lay dying, he said, "Tell my mother I died for my country. I did what I thought was best." Now, mind you, Booth was a Confederate sympathizer, meaning he has sympathetic views towards the Confederacy. He supported the Confederacy and the institution of slavery as a whole. Word of advice: do not support the enemy. Bad bombing, that one. Now, he asked to see his hands. And when a soldier picks up Booth's hands and his head while he was paralyzed, Booth uttered, "Useless, useless." Then he died. Now, while Booth was on the run before his death, many of Booth's co-conspirators were found and captured. Many of them David Spangler, George E. Atzerodt, Lewis Powell, Mary Surratt, and many others. Now, Mudd, and although he was captured by federal troops, he denies involvement of the assassination, nor the plot to decapitate the government of the United States, and he was sentenced to prison for a little while. He was imprisoned at Fort Jefferson in Florida. Now, as for the other co-conspirators, David Harold, Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt, all four which in July of 65, they were executed, hung by the neck until death. Word of advice, do not decapitate the government of the United States. If you do, there will be severe consequences. There will be, trust me. Now, on to Joseph E. Johnston. He surrendered to William T. Sherman on the 26th, which was the exact same day that Booth died. Now, even though the war was effectively over, there were still Confederate troops out on the field. And this happened sometime in that Lee surrendered to Grant. And Joseph E. Johnston and William T. Sherman met at a place called Bennett's Place. Their meetings took place in which Sherman wanted the surrender of Joseph E. Johnston's Confederate Army. Now, of course, this took place there were several meetings that occurred, many of which happened when Lincoln was assassinated. And there were still, as I said earlier, Rebs out in the field. Now, Grant, when Lee surrendered to him, wanted all officers to retrieve their sidearms and swords, including their horses. They can have with them. They can keep their swords and their revolvers. But any Confederate soldier that has their horses, they're free to take them home. But all rifles and accoutrements, they were stacked and they were headed home. And they were paroled until properly exchanged. Which is, I'm guessing, was the same thing that happened in Bennett's Place. Now, on the 26th, however, Johnston agreed to surrender. Now, agreeing to surrender, Johnston marched his men in, and these men stacked their arms, unbuckled their accoutrements, furled their banners for the last time, then they headed home, refusing to take up arms against the United States. And that pretty much marked the end of the war, effectively. And yeah, that's what happened on the 26th. And any of you think the South would rise again? Don't push it. The North won, and I'm sorry. Slavery is wrong. It is wrong to own people. And mind you, those who don't know history are forever doomed to repeat it. Remember that. And yeah, that's it for this video, my friends. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like this, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell notifications so that way you can be notified if I upload the next video. And as always, this is LEGO Maker 96 1, signing off.